Hey guys, back with Beyond the Sequence. Here's Sarah Amadon and Amanda Archibald, and we are coming to you from Indianapolis and from Grand Junction, Colorado again. We're moving slowly into spring, and we're super excited about that. The Winter Olympics have been on, and I've been watching all of those recordings and trying to stay up to date. But since we're going to be talking about sports today, what extreme performance reveals about tissue failure and why athletes are breaking. So we're really excited to take and bounce off of our last episode where why are bodies breaking, and we're going to get into why athletes are breaking as well. So we're going to kind of jump in with a little lighthearted question, which is what was your favorite type of activity or movement as a kid, Amanda, and now as an adult?
Yeah, as a kid, it was easy because we didn't have all the inputs, all the options back then. So I grew up riding horses. Actually, I had my own horses for years. So I did all the horse things from one-day events to three-day events to dressage, and we had different words there for horse riding and how we call events. But yeah, I was a horse rider, but I was also a netball player.
Okay.
I don't see netball in the United States. I wish we had it. But it's a game like if you talk to people from the UK or South Africa or Australia and New Zealand, we all play netball. It's very competitive. And yeah, I came to the United States and said, why do they bounce the ball in basketball? We had to keep it off the ground like volleyball, right? Don't bounce the ball. So that's what I did as a kid.
And what do you like to do as an adult now? What's your favorite type of movement and
Oh,
activity?
I live in paradise, so I have all the different skiing sports, to the hiking, to the paddling on the river, to all the, mountain biking and road riding. So I actually really don't have a favorite. I just like whatever the day takes. If it's a paddleboard or a mountain bike, that's doesn't matter. What's the weather? What's the day? What's the season?
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed going on our hike in the Colorado National Monument with you. I guess that was two
Two
years
years
ago.
ago, yeah,
Wow, or I guess a
yeah.
year and a half ago. That was super fun. My boys loved it. They pushed back on, I don't want to do that when they got there. They were like, this is awesome. Can we come back?
Yeah,
So
because it's just a playground of rock, right? And they can hide in the crevices and scramble and yeah.
yeah. My favorite kind of movement as a kid, I was always the girl, like the only girl playing soccer with all the boys at recess. I was never very interested in like girl drama growing up, so I kind of
Okay.
stuck with the boys. I have two brothers growing up, so it's just kind of I was always that tomboy. And then in fifth grade and sixth grade, I was actually our class's jump rope champion. So I love jumping, and so it
Yeah.
translates really, really well to volleyball. I love jumping on a trampoline. I've just really enjoyed jumping. I feel really good. So that the lymphatic drainage is, part
Hmm.
of that with rebounding. So yeah, and I also really enjoyed basketball early on in life and did a lot of dance, 7 years of dance, which
Wow,
credit
you're
I credit
tall.
to yeah, I credit my dance to helping me be at least somewhat coordinated in the rest of my sports. And
Hmm.
tap was my favorite. And I've actually considered like getting back into tap classes now as an adult and maybe pulling Greg in with me because we do a little bit of ballroom stuff together and
Yeah.
enjoy the waltz. And now mostly volleyball, but I like any kind of movement. I love high intensity interval training as my body tolerates and doesn't increase too much chronic pain. But I do have to be careful to not overdo it. And we will talk about some of those
No
things
kidding.
today about overdoing it and how that can cause injuries. So,
It's interesting watching the Olympics right now that there's been these little threads of recovery in the advertisements. There's a mattress company. I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know what they're called, but it was kind of neat and featured a couple of different athletes. And really, their focus is on sleep and recovery is a bigger piece of performance and performance itself with the training. I thought that was really neat, given that we're going to be talking about that. So,
yeah, I was
yeah.
doing some Sports Nutrition Foundation's a webinar series for a volleyball club in Wisconsin. And we started off with hydration for the first talk. The second talk was the pre and post fueling and meal timing. And then the third talk was on supplements. So, like, kind of breaking through the noise of supplements and like what should we look out for, how to read labels, and what supplements might actually be useful. And so it can be really challenging for athletes to not feel confused by all the TikTok influencing and things that are constantly trying to market and sell to us. But when we're talking about those foundations, the nutrition, hydration, and timing, that's like the base of sports performance. And on top of that is sleep and its recovery and taking those seriously. And then your body is prepared for training. So I think sometimes we talk about the particulars of the nutrition side of things, but we don't want to forget about the sleep and recovery piece because that can be very transformative. If we're not sleeping well, you're not recovering well. So I actually love that there's a mattress advertisement.
Yeah, it was neat.
sports.
Yeah, you'll see it now. You'll be looking for it. So yeah, so it's interesting. We're talking about this topic, and you work. We're talking about this topic with the backdrop of the Winter Olympics, which is super cool. We're going to sew that in and out of what we're seeing, maybe particularly some of the more in-our-face performances, crashes, etc. But you, Sarah, work with both elite, pro, so the kind of the one and the same, but even up-and-coming athletes in a variety of sports. So tell us which sports you're focusing on and what are some of the patterns you're seeing, just to set the stage for where we're headed here.
Yeah, I've been playing volleyball for a really long time. And when I saw my own gene blueprint about 10 years ago, not only was I blown away for my own health and my health needs at the time, but immediately I thought, wow, I wish I had this 20 years ago for my own sports performance, because it would have altered like how I walked into, the cafeteria in college and what I chose to eat, excuse me, at least from what was available. It would have helped me think more clearly about like, okay, what's actually going to help benefit me for recovery and for sports performance. But it would have potentially changed how we train as well. So when I've done, I don't know, a few dozen, elite and professional athletes in particular. And when you look at them side by side, let's say you've got 10 players standing on the end line and you've got 6 players who are high impact genes for, collagen and joints are compromised, or bone health, or recovery needs are very high. They just have a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress. How would you treat those players differently if you knew that information ahead of time? So I think that's the direction that we're going. And Gareth Wallace is in the UK, and he said that in a talk one time. He's like, we just have to understand that this is the direction that things are going and that the science is taking us. And I just really appreciated that coming from a PhD researcher in, physiology of, exercise physiology and nutrition. But I think we could do a much better job of supporting sports nutrition just in general. Like before we even get into the genomics piece, we do need those sports nutrition foundations that I just talked about. But we need to all be on the same page with coaching staff. And there are definitely Division I programs who don't think that nutrition matters, and the way that they treat some of our sports dietitian colleagues is more like glorified food service or a locker room stock person. And there's so much more to us in our training that we can validate the athlete experience, but also we can help support you get those championships that you're after. So I don't know if you've noticed that. You've worked with a few athletes and elite athletes as well yourself.
Not so much. Actually, mine is more touching the experts who are working, with athletes. So our good colleagues, Dina Griffin and Bob Siebehar in the Denver area, I've known for years, and I've learned so much from them about how they are experts in sports nutrition, and they're touching in genomics too, and have such a deep respect for what it takes to understand how to fuel athletes. I'm like hands off. That's its own specialty. And I was thinking about this before coming into the podcast that many years ago, when I was living in Europe, I would attend like conferences in Europe, and one of the guys that come over was called Dan, and I can't remember his last name, but he was a PhD, taught at Georgia State University, and he would say to us, anyone who wants to work in sports nutrition, you better understand that sport inside and out. You better understand if hockey is your gig, every rule of the game. You just show up and like say, well, I do the sports nutrition. He said, do you understand how to fuel these athletes and what it takes? And that's what I love in sports nutrition. People who are brilliant in their game, like Dina and Bob, because I'm looking at some of the data that they work with. They do nutrient timing and metabolic testing. I'm like, I can't even read the graphs. Well, I can understand it, but it's really interesting to now see that level of data and how we combine that with genomics. Boom, that completely will change maybe how somebody can push, how they're accessing their different nutrient stores. So to answer your question, I work with a lot of active individuals who may have been former athletes, but I would never set myself up and say, yeah, I can really help you win an Olympic medal. Nah, that's not me. But I can then identify like exactly where we cross over. I can identify from the genomics where the rate limiting steps might be. So I just want to jump in, Sarah, real quick. What I didn't do is tee us up properly and let our listeners know that with these podcasts, we're going to go through 4 areas. What we're seeing, that's what Sarah and I are talking about right now, what we're seeing. Then we'll go to why it's happening, the patterns we see, and how we guide. So we're still talking about what we're seeing. And let me jump in with just a question for you, Sarah. Like, we're watching the Olympics. What have you seen that has really said, I wonder if that outcome might potentially be different if we'd done ABC, or the training staff knew ABC? What comes to your mind?
Yeah, watching Winter Olympics, what do most of maybe not all of the sports, but many of the sports in the Winter Olympics have something in common. And obviously it's cold, right? But we're talking about performing at elevations. And so, the frequent injuries that we're seeing with some of our downhill skiers, and even the competition stage in, Park City, Utah for training for speed skating and luge and skeleton and bobsled, those are all often at elevations in hypoxic environments. And that there's a reason that the U.S. Olympic headquarters is in Colorado Springs as well. And so there's a benefit to training in these hypoxic environments. However, when we look at those DNA blueprints for some of these athletes that are having recurring injuries, we see tissue breakdown. So if you refer back to our last episode where we talked about the MMPs, the matrix remodeling for those tissues, the zinc dependency of those enzymes, that if you are predisposed to having tissue breakdown, you add in, high performance, high training, and then you add in a hypoxic environment, it is very possible that your body is going to be breaking down faster than it can repair and rebuild.
Yeah, you had mentioned you were going to talk about that, and I tend to be thinking about that in the non-athletic sense, because we have a lot of people who come to the high altitude areas who feel absolutely terrible. I'm like, okay, just get them to one of those oxygen chambers or whatever. They'll feel a lot better, which is why we actually sell these like kind of oxygen canisters. I've never had to use them, but imagine then taking someone who just comes on a plane to our high environments, and they are challenged, and then you put somebody under intense training, and they usually can survive it. But what is hidden is what you're talking about, is the hidden breakdown of tissues that's not being measured because it's not necessarily been thought of because you can't see it, right? Mm-hmm. You're not looking at genetics. Say, wait a minute here. So give an example of a couple of genes there that, you look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we might be jumping ahead a little bit. Are we talking about our patterns we recognize, or are we still talking about...
No, I mean, you went to that. It's like the question, we're going to come back to that. But hypoxic, and breakdown, you mentioned the MMPs. But we may look at for hypoxia too, which we'll come back to.
Yeah, the HIF-1 alpha is, kind of the master regulator of that, and it can help manage those hypoxic environments to encourage the downstream impact of managing inflammation. So, yeah, oxygen transport, pretty important. So if you're already an anemic athlete and you're in a hypoxic environment, and I've actually had some individuals who are not necessarily professional athletes, but who live at higher elevations who have had mold exposure that they're managing. We've got high oxidative stress from just trying to manage either an infection or mold. And then, we're in a hypoxic environment at those elevations and they really struggle. They're not well. And so trying to balance that chemical equation is what we have to do to support that so that the body can heal itself.
Yeah, and so I think downhill skiers, and another thing that you've also seen, kind of like melding in two different segments here. We've talked about like a couple of years ago is a significant number of soft tissue and ACL injuries in certain sports. So we've just seen that front and center in downhill skiing. Although we've seen the best side of that too, right? Breezy Johnson, is that her name, who won the
Yep.
gold on the
Mm-hmm.
same crash pad as Lindsay. She'd also come off like 4 years of a significant ACL injury and repair, right? And then the winner of the giant slalom yesterday, the Italian skier. Oh my gosh, up until like, we didn't even know she was going to ski, right? But she, in a number of months ago, tore her ACL, and it was absolutely amazing that she came back and won. But maybe she had the right genomic coach, Sarah. So, but you said to me over the years that look at this sport. Why does this keep happening? Name some sports that you've seen this that keep coming up.
Yeah, a couple in 2022, there was a release of the number of ACL tears in women's soccer in across 6 leagues. There were 57 ACL tears in 2022 across these 6 leagues for women's soccer or football, the right football.
The right football people, right?
So, we've already established that women's bodies are different. Our hormones are highly impactful with repair and with performance and recovery. We know that. We just are majorly lacking in research in this area. So, if we're more at risk during certain times of our menstrual cycle, is that a clue that we just all should be on birth control and we should suppress all of these hormones? Amanda, what do you think of that
I really hadn't
conclusion?
thought about that too, because I wanted you to go back to, we already know, what is it you said? We already know women are more predisposed to what? Injury because of their hormones. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the
Okay,
hormone
talk about that.
fluctuation.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, at times of estrogen, I think it's when estrogen is lowest. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head that we might have more risk for injury. And if that's the case, so that's right before your period's starting, in the latter half of your cycle and coming into your menstrual cycle. So do you change your training according to your menstrual cycle? That would be the question. And but we also have to adapt and change and recalibrate things throughout our cycle, because your sport and your training and your performances are not going to stop just because your cycle is not optimal at that time.
No, exactly. You can't pick the date of the competition. That's an interesting point.
And women are going to win gold medals at all times of their cycles, is the truth. So, what we can do is better equip them with the knowledge and empowering them on what to do with their nutrition and their training, collaborating with strength and conditioning. And so, with beach volleyball, I've collaborated with the team medical doctor as well as the sports dietitian who works with the team. And it's a really beautiful thing because I'm never going to be able to be the sports dietitian over any team or any university. That's just not my position. So collaborating with the sports dietitian that is with that team so that they can keep doing what they're doing really, really well, and I come in and consult, has really been a great benefit, because at the Olympic level, if you have low hormones, and we see that, predisposition genetically, you cannot give hormones to women And so if they have low hormones, they're going to be more at risk for bone fractures and collagen and tissue breaking away from bone. But if you can't give hormones, what do you do? And so they're honestly all ears to be able to, well, what's your thoughts? What are your ideas? And I think lessening the cortisol and stress response is really helpful. So go into fuel timing. But for some, using like ashwagandha has been very supportive for that cortisol response. And even boron can help metabolize your magnesium, vitamin D, and calcium better. And we can find that in prunes and prune juice. So a shout out to my friend Jackie Dykes, who loves talking about boron as well as a sports dietitian. And she's like, go to your prunes and prune juice. And your dried fruits are pretty high in that. So there are ways to do that nutritionally to support even the bioactive compounds you'll find in prunes and prune juice. So
it's about the prune juice. And now we have another, like a completely different way of looking at it, right? That we probably
yeah.
learned therapeutically. Oh my goodness.
Well, honestly, like I grew up just going, oh, you only use that if you have constipation. But, these foods
To my
have been
point.
used for hundreds of years, for nutrition, but there are ways we can target that as well.
And I think it was you that was saying, not to take us off course here, but wasn't there a role, or maybe it's biotin and testosterone, or is it boron and testosterone? It was you who had mentioned it. And
Boron.
it's
Hmm.
boron. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it can help free up bound testosterone. So I have had a few athletes who have high sex hormone binding globulin, and boron can help free up that testosterone. Things that can increase sex hormone binding globulin, meaning your hormones are going to be lower. Caffeine actually can really disrupt that hormone metabolism. So watching out for caffeine, and I think I had read too much flax as well can increase sex hormone binding globulin. So that might be,
It's
just
interesting. These healthy things, right? They're good for you because it's a source of fiber. How does that show up in athletes then with low testosterone? How would that manifest? In strength or power or,
yeah,
yeah.
because hormones are anabolic, so they're going to help the ability to perform by increasing muscle mass, power, performance. So if you have low hormones, you're not building up anything. It's going to be catabolic constantly. But inflammation is going to be catabolic and impact your hormone metabolism. So yeah, it's been awesome collaborating with Team USA medical doc and sports dietitian Brooke Wyatt. She's also incredible. They've been very encouraging and very supportive and like, whatever you need, let us know. So hopefully that grows into other sports. Because I definitely have sports dietitians who said, but Sarah, I can't even get my athletes to eat breakfast. And so I do a sports genomics talk where I'm like, I'm validating you here, but we can use this information to go, hey, we know that we want our athletes to eat breakfast. They think that they know everything. And sometimes I'll hear them say that's nothing I didn't already know. And I'll go, okay, but Brooke told you to do this and you're not doing that. So let's look at your genes and I will show you why you still need to listen to Brooke. And so it can help to leverage genomic insights into sports performance to improve, recovery and to improve performance so that they can eventually reach their goals. Because if you say that your goal is, I want to go to the Olympics, but we're not doing X, Y, and Z, is that really a goal for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Well, we've already started to dish it up. Why do we see? We started to talk about why are we seeing what we're not thinking of, with these athletes? Why are they getting injured? And I think we'll wind that in and out as we look even more at patterns and some of the genes. But I think it leads to this question about what kind of load tends to go uncounted. What are we not thinking about? Is everything? The question is always about fueling and somebody got injured. It must have been their training or they didn't do something right. But there's these hidden loads, these hidden insights that even the sports community are not talking about, and maybe sports dietitians are not talking about because they don't have the lens that we may
Hmm.
have. So let's talk about that. What kind of loads go uncounted with these
Yeah, the
athletes?
the further along you get in your sports and performance, the higher the level, the less your training has a role and the more the mental piece has a role. So the top athletes that I work with will all, sing the praises of their sports psychologist, in kind of overcoming mental blocks and mental burdens. So, like right now, if we've got athletes that are not quite making it onto the podium, the things that are being said about them and to them on social media and in the news, like, you've let us all down, or you've failed the country, and it's like, let's put this in perspective here. Many of these athletes work multiple jobs. They don't even have the opportunity. I don't know if you know this, but our government does not pay for our Olympic athletes and our professional teams, unlike many around the world. So it's not a comfortable life to be a professional
It's not.
athlete. You have to decide, are you going to, work a job that pays the bills, or are you going to pursue being a professional athlete? Because at some point you have to train more and focus more on your body and your performance at the expense of that full-time job that might fire you, or that you don't have enough time to train to reach your goals and dreams. And that's a very common juggle. So the mental burden of stress, kind of piggybacking on our last episode, is that's a huge stressor that isn't even including, training. So
I
having
have to, you'd kind of say something to that, like 100, 1,000%. And you would ask, hey, do you work with some athletes? Like, no, I don't. But yes, I did. And I was just thinking back to a couple of Olympics ago, we were working with a female boxer.
hmm
And she was surely enough at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, and she had to work the jobs. I mean, how do you train at that level? And there's also a huge disparity between male and female. I'm sorry, but that is very true. And depends on the sport. Female boxing is not going to get the same level of investment or eyeballs on the screen, and therefore sponsorship, as maybe male downhill skiing. Okay, female downhill skiing, but you get the point, right? And so you're absolutely right. Even then, when they were amateurs, pros, whatever they are not getting funded, and they're living in horrible conditions, having to train because that is their dream. But the only way they can put food on the table is to do like delivery or working in a restaurant. Imagine being a boxer and your part-time job is standing on your feet. you know, Instead of recovering. It's just crazy. Not that that's it, you get the point, but and she really suffered. She had a huge health issues. No, that's not fair. Huge, a lot of issues that were not being taken seriously, that were kind of flying under the radar screen. Digestive issues, which are a direct reflection, of stress and mental health as well. But yeah.
and zinc.
Oh, and zinc, but we were able to read the genomics. And right back then, that was like 8 years ago. So made a huge difference because we could get right to, not root cause, that's not our job, but we could be part of the journey to restoration. And she did make it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's really helpful too that there's been an instance where I was able to be on site for a volleyball tournament, and one of my athletes calls me, and he's having this issue that's going on and is like, "Hey, do you have any thoughts on what I should do?"
I
I could
remember this.
go pull from his gene report, and was able to hop in there. I had a couple supplements with me. There was a juicery around the corner that, had your ginger and your turmeric and, some anti-inflammatory things to help manage this issue. And he went from maybe going to pull out of the tournament on Friday to making the finals on Sunday. And, not to toot my own horn, but I don't think he would have made it past Saturday if I was not there and if I was not implementing the things that I knew from his gene report. So,
You know what I like about that story, because you told it a few times, and it's really cool, is you said, I pulled his gene report. That's, in other words, you weren't like, oh, this is good for inflammation or whatever. Try this. You immediately went back and said, let me understand how this person's built. And that's how our consults go too. We don't answer a question without going back to see how is that person built that might be informing this situation. And I think that's the missing part in sports, right? Is how might the way this person is built, what their blueprint, direct the load, the fueling, the recovery, what you may or may not do over what period of time. So I think that's like a really key take-home point. Genomics, we always refer back to the blueprint to think about, how we'd answer something.
absolutely. We don't have, people's gene reports memorized, they're
No,
great reference
not on our
material.
phones. Yeah.
And in fact, I may not even have that pathway memorized, but if I go,
Exactly.
okay, here's what's happening and that's presenting as a symptom, let me work backwards and how is this all plugging in and fitting together? So I don't want people who are listening to go, oh, well, I don't have that brain and I don't work that way. It's not magic. It's, we know what references we need to use, whether that's pulling, a paper, which this is super interesting too. I had an athlete with like a family history of melanoma, and
Yeah.
there was a SNP that was recently added to the 3x4 report related to omega 3s not necessarily converting to DHA. And I found one paper on, the increased risk for skin cancer and melanoma with this SNP. And so you would never put together like omega 3s and DHA and deficiencies in that, then leading down towards skin cancer. Because what we hear and see is, well, you need to protect your skin, you need to, cover up, you need to put sunscreen on. But when we look at genomics, and I have many, many beach volleyball athletes who are deficient in vitamin D, and some of them don't even wear sunscreen. So answer me that. Like, we're trying to, pull at straws when we need to better understand how they're built, refer to their gene reports, and also understand what's the inflammation load happening under the surface that then manifests in the immune system not functioning properly. We're not resolving inflammation. It can show up as skin cancer. It's not just about what you're putting, on your skin, although the chemical sunscreens are going to be endocrine disruptors, bar none. So we need to be thoughtful about what sunscreen we're using. Is that impacting the endocrine system, which is increasing inflammation, low vitamin D,
And
then
low EPA and DHA, which are immune modulators, and you've got a perfect storm in
yeah,
a place you'd never been thinking of.
nope. So that was wild to see that paper because I hope we have more research on it in the future. That blew me away, but I was like, that's really interesting. Let me, dig into that a little bit more. But there have definitely been inappropriate uses of genomics. This is an actual story from a dietitian colleague who had said, my endurance runner athlete went to a performance center who was using genomics, and they said, you're sensitive to carbohydrates. We need to reduce those.
What does that mean, sensitive to carbohydrates?
I'm guessing they mean like glucose and insulin signaling is
That's
probably
that's what I was
what
thinking.
they're seeing. But if we are not taking the context and the story of the athlete into account,
Yeah.
recommending any endurance athlete or any athlete reduce their carbohydrate intake is a bad idea. And guess what happened?
They
Low
bombed.
energy, fatigue, poor performance. Shocking. That might be something.
You can imagine.
Yeah. So I can understand why our colleagues are also critical of genomics because when you aren't using it appropriately, you can have really bad results.
But you know what's interesting? I'm still kind of thinking of it, just looking at this nutrient timing, the metabolic testing that Dina and Bob do, and like, oh my gosh, cross mapping that with this idea of, carbohydrate, what is it, resistance or whatever it was this person was diagnosed with. You can definitely see where things cross over, but that's where the timing comes in, and how you build meals, right? And how you pre-fuel and all the things that are not my expertise, to be able to know that there's going to be some genomic or biochemical pushback. Well, that's how they manipulate the nutrients or whatever. It was just amazing to see. But there are other things that would complex that as well, such as inflammation, right? Or the right cofactors for fueling. Yeah, it's fascinating, the data we see. That the SNP you were talking about, is it EELO? I can never pronounce it, EVOL1 or whatever.
Yes, it is.
ELOVL, that one.
Yes.
It's so interesting. And some testing companies have had that on there for a while. Now she has to look it up so we don't misspeak it on air here. But thanks,
It's
Sarah.
ELOVL2.
Two. Okay.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. That's sort of come on our radar screen within one of the tests we use. And the frequency of that is quite high. I'm seeing more women than men, but that's just kind of what I've noticed. So it's interesting because often we're looking at like this FADS1, FADS2, which is another gene we look at in these omega pathways, but the frequency of that has been pretty high. So yeah. And it makes us ask questions. Okay, so we talked about load. I know the unspoken things that show up. Is there anything else that is coming to mind? Things we're not thinking of?
I mean, alongside, the fatty acid piece, I do utilize like SPMs, or specialized pro-resolving mediators, for those athletes that just have a lot of inflammation. Because that can help support all of the connective tissue, and fat is the lubricant for the joints, so we don't want to ever forget that. And the brain is like 60% fat, so our bodies do need fat. And I do see occasionally some athletes who have stated that they do better with a little more fat in their diet. It's not that they're reducing carbohydrates, it's just that they do really well with higher fat. So not necessarily like a ketogenic or anything like that, but it's okay, to alter, some of their nutrient composition if they report to, and I see it in their genes, like, hey, I do feel like I do better with more fat.
And you can actually see it if they're doing the nutrient timing too. You can actually see that they access it maybe earlier, or gives them that prolonged performance. Is just me observing what I'm seeing. But again, it's this brilliant area where I think you can take that and say, well, it's actually true. Genomically, you would perform better with higher fat. We haven't known that, right? We haven't known the why. We just know, oh, this is it. But now we can actually see maybe they have genes that transport those fatty acids easier into the mitochondria or what have you. So
Yeah, the PPARG side of things, I think sometimes can be an advantage. Yeah.
What I see, because I'm these patterns that are showing up, which is really, really interesting. Then we'll look at, in terms of like, how's it showing up? When I look at the individuals I see who may or may not have been athletes, I tend to see people who are more kind of masters athletes, or they're still really, really active as they go into their older years. And what I found fascinating of late is when you see people continue to perform, and you'll see this too, Sarah, but yeah, probably in a much younger population, they continue to perform against all odds. In other words, they're going to continue running or whatever they're doing, even though they are so depleted, and they're hobbling around, right? And they're just going to do it anyway. And they're braces. See, on the pickleball court, right? They'll come with all amount of braces, knee braces. I'm like, you can hardly get out of your car, but there they are, right? On the court. So it's just awesome to see. But you kind of see, like, I don't know, I think we need to send you to a physical therapist. That does not look comfortable. And where I'm getting to here is, like, I look at that and say, why would you do that? It looks awful. It looks so painful. And when I pull genomics, it is fascinating to the point about mental health. You mentioned this. This is just how they're built from a dopamine perspective. that some people, and this is the correlation I see, and why we can have like, these, some like snowboarders, they're like doing death-defying things, crash and get up and do it again. I'm like, I'll look at these athletes and say, I know what their dopamine genes look like, and they probably like DRD3, like, and there's probably some DRD4 there that they are primed, or they have SNPs, if you will, variants that mean they don't get a big enough hit being like me, or maybe you're a performance athlete, Sarah, but when we take a little easier in life, they don't know what that feels like. And they are literally adrenaline junkies, because it doesn't feel good until it hurts, or till you hit it that high, or till you spin that high. Do you see that too? Have you correlated that? Because I definitely do in my more master's level.
Yeah, I would say
Athletes.
it's probably better managed for most of my athletes. There aren't a ton of them that complain about pain, but I think our perception of pain in our culture is not a healthy one. I went to the American Volleyball Coaches Association, or AVCA convention, that's tied to the Final Four a year ago. And there was a gentleman who was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Pain is weakness leaving the body."
Oh gosh, that's yeah, I've
And
seen that.
I felt so triggered by that, because of what I know, that yes, we need to push, we need to work hard, we need to grind, but at some point we also need to realize that recovery is has just as much of a role in our performance as the actual training piece, and helping athletes who are, for lack of a better word, like addicted to high performance. And that's the
100%.
dopamine,
It
right? It's the
is.
high of performance. So, are all of our high performance athletes dopamine addicts? Maybe
No.
a little bit.
I know, we're going to find out, aren't we? Yeah.
Oh, we have to reframe, how we're doing our training, because, pushing to two soccer matches a week increases the risk for, ACL tears in soccer players by like seven times, 7x. So as opposed to, one competition a week, going to two competitions a week, the overuse injuries skyrocket. So we need to be thoughtful and careful. And even in volleyball right now, we have our favorite players who are playing, in some of the American professional leagues, and we're complaining and whining on social media why our favorite player isn't out there on the court. And I, what I want to say to that is, we love our favorite players. We want to see them on the court, but we also need a deep bench if you are going to make it into the playoffs. That is the end of the story, because these athletes train and work really, really hard. And then if they're playing every single match, and at least in the volleyball league that the India Ignite plays in, they have two matches every week. We don't want our favorite players to play every single match or the whole match, because we need to rest them to have the longevity for the entire team to be taken in consideration. The number of jumps that they're doing every day, their swings, like, this is hard work on the body for overhead sports. So, for those who are listening, like, we want our favorite players, but just like you've got, 10 pitchers in, the bullpen who are ready at the ready, we need to be thinking about many of our sports, our high impact sports, that way. In that, hey, we're going to play this pitcher today, we're going to play this pitcher next week. And it's not a ding against anyone's abilities or character. We need to be thoughtful about what the coaching staff decisions are about who's playing and when. And it probably doesn't have as much to do with their performance as you think it does.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's so key. We could come back and talk about just that another time.
Performance
Yeah,
recovery.
particularly like I'm thinking of these jumping sport. You're tall, volleyball, basketball. There is a consequence to being 6'4", 6'8", that I think deserves its own podcast. And going back to your point about I'm just trying to think with athletes, we want to see our favorite players, and some of the dings our athletes are getting, what they should say, when they shouldn't say, why they didn't perform. She should have done this, they shouldn't have done that. The influence of betting on the psyche of athletes is probably
Gosh.
the most destructive thing I have ever seen. And I had no idea what these athletes go through, from people who were just like armchair observers, no understanding of what it takes for performance. And then kind of putting these athletes under pressure because they didn't make a shot or what have you is like, it's unbelievable. And you talk about the impact of that on mental health, and then on sleep and on recovery is unwarranted. So,
Yeah, I didn't even think about the betting side. It's not
oh
something I
my gosh. Yeah,
get
I
in,
didn't
but
know.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a big thing right now. Wow.
Yeah, I think about that. And then you're on social media, just like, oh my, just watching, trying to see what your friends say or what have you. And then boom, you have like 200 messages from people because you didn't make a shot or what have you. Is amazing. I wanted to, just before we talk about specific genes, just go back to that dopamine piece and where I'm seeing it showing up in performance, because again, the people I see may have been competitive track athletes, but now they're in the 40s or 50s and continued running. What often shows up for these individuals is they don't know how to give up something they've known all their lives. So they continue into extending like a marathon, into an ultra marathon, even though their performance is going backwards. They're not able to leave this alone, which makes me think about the dopamine piece, something I'm actually actively investigating, or serotonin. So it does have to do with mental health. But what is happening now with these athletes is they're actually not able to get away from their metabolism. In other words, the inflammation, the lack of recovery, the oxidative stress from continuing to do something their body can't do anymore, or it's not being properly supported through nutrition, is actually showing up in things like sleep, poor sleep, but more importantly for them, and devastatingly, weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Yes.
it's like, and then they'll run harder and push harder. Well, I've got to go to the gym more. I got to do orange theory, whatever they're doing. I'm going to jump in cold ponds or do the cold baths, time restricted eating, under fuel, over fuel, fat instead of carbohydrates or whatever. And they're trying to run away from what their body's trying to tell them, which is that what we were going back to, what loads are we not accounting for?
Yeah.
Genomics tells us all of that. It gives us such a key lens into what's happening. Aisle thing. So you can still do what you love, but put it in the context of you want to keep doing it for the rest of your life and how we have to reset. So it's interesting taking you working. I mean, you work across the lifespan too, but I tend to be working, 40s and above and not working with younger athletes to see how this plays out when you haven't forgotten what it was like to be in youth sports or, high performance. Yeah, there's a lot going on.
So true. Yeah. I know we touched on it briefly last episode, but yeah, the overtraining, the underfueling for weight loss is a recipe for inflammation and for not losing weight. So eating actual meals every day and having your, carbohydrate, protein, and color is kind of a non-negotiable. And we can't protein shake our way to fitness, and we can't coffee our way, skipping breakfast and assuming that our body is going to be properly fueled. You want to eat something before you go to the gym, because if you are going to do a workout unfueled, your body is going to use that muscle for fuel. So you're actually actively sabotaging your goals and your body composition by not fueling before you go to a workout.
Yeah,
So
it's so true.
these
Yeah,
are
if we could
these are some of the
pull,
basics.
I was thinking if we could just pull like a metabolic test or a test like an organic acid test, something right before and right after you do a heavy workout, we can literally show you, how that's happening time and time again. Sarah, let's pivot to gene. Like, I said, oh, what's that gene? Tell us more about HIF1 alpha, but let's talk about what we do, seeing the blueprint and patterns we see. What tells us what's behind these patterns?
Yeah, I've had some, not necessarily like a professional athlete, but someone who loves doing triathlons, and he came to me and was like, "Hey, I'd love to, just see what I need to know." He wasn't necessarily trying to manage anything in particular, but he was working out twice a day, high stress job, has to get up really early in the morning to go to work, so he's getting up at like 4 or 5 a.m., but doing a workout before going to work on his feet, kind of a physical job, and then would have another workout later in the day, and was doing some of these triathlons. His cardiac and inflammatory markers were very high for
Wow.
someone who's as fit as he is. So that's the perfect example of some of those things that just because people who have a heart attack who are the fittest people you've ever seen, that's what's happening. So we see those risks in the genes, and talking him back to, hey, I think working out once a day is enough for you, and that will actually get you more return than going to the gym for a second hour for your day, especially with the high mental burden of stress. So kind of piggybacking on what you just said, but we're seeing that in the lab. So to kind of take that a step further, seeing it in the genes with those inflammatory markers with, IL-6, IL-1, but then confirming that with some of his lab results. So, if we've got high oxidative stress, we love our superoxide dismutase, our glutathione peroxidase, catalase, but then piggyback that on, TNF alpha and the inflammatory
CRP.
cytokines, C-reactive protein. We're going to have challenges in managing cholesterol, in managing cardiac markers like those apolipoproteins.
So what you're saying then, like we're able to look at genomics, of course, validate that in laboratory testing. So you mentioned genes that are key gatekeepers in how the body manages oxidative stress. And if we don't start there, that engages the immune system. When the immune system's dysregulated, then you pointed to cardiac markers. So cholesterol is we know in the acute care setting is an acute phase reactant. You're going to see it as elevated as the body is responding to an inflammatory or trauma response, which you would see in sport. This isn't about a crash, right? It's about high performance and the body pulling on everything it needs to fuel performance. Is that what you're talking about? That you
yes,
would see that
exactly.
pass through. Yeah, we're not thinking about that, are we? And then you see, well, wait, I'm a high performance athlete. I'm out there, I'm skinny, or I'm muscled up or whatever. I'm at the best shape, but my doctor says I have to be on a statin. It's like, well, why don't we kind of dial this back to what is the level of trauma or inflammation or oxidative burden you're putting on your body, and ease that burden, right? Whether it's through recovery, fueling, training, sleep, or what have you, to see if we can change those markers. That's how often did you see that, Sarah? Like your athletes, with or without the
Well,
genomic, there's some predispositions cardiovascularly, but
yeah, I don't necessarily get all of the lab results from my professional athletes. They kind of have the basics, and unless they, want to order more, I don't necessarily get to see all of those markers. But I do see it occasionally with some of my pro athletes, but these are, more of my like weekend warrior,
they're the
athlete
athlete. That's
types.
what I would see. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's just validating how about we take that second workout that you were going to do and we do an Epsom salt bath, or we go in the sauna, or we do some qigong, or yoga and movement, and work on flexibility and range of motion, instead of
100%.
let's get our heart rates
Slamming.
up,
Yeah.
let's really make it hurt in the gym. That's changing that mindset again and
Pain,
reframing.
pain comes with a medal, right?
No pain, no gain, right?
um, what about, let's talk about, because those genes come out, you pretty much all the time, we're going to talk about these oxidative stress, inflammation inducing genes. But there are some genes that we look at for soft tissue, right? And let's talk about that, because that's what we're seeing. Like you talk about ACLs, soft tissue injuries. Let's talk about what genes we see there, and then genes we look at for recovery that tell us that somebody needs to kind of build in longer recovery. So let's do the tissue ones first.
Yeah, we did mention some of these on our last episode, so definitely
Mm-hmm.
go back and listen to it. But the collagen repair genes, COL12A1, as well as the MMPs that we had mentioned. There's a couple of collagen related genes, but how well are we repairing those to increase or lower our risk of those soft tissue injuries? The Achilles tendon ones, those are brutal injuries. They take well over a year to fully recover and get back on the court. And so we need to be thoughtful about our training load and our nutrition to be able to manage that better. And those can go hand in hand with bone health occasionally as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so see those pretty often. The MMPs I'm seeing more often than I'd like, unfortunately.
And without their offset, the TIMP4, which is kind of the other side of the seesaw, if you see all those sort of like, yeah, the red, flashing red, it's like, yeah, we need to have a conversation about training load, mobility, right, nutrition. Because when we're looking at collagen synthesis or tissue rebuilding, we need vitamin C dynamically and proline. And it's very often we'll see that gene or those genes dysregulated that are integral to collagen synthesis, including vitamin C recycling, right? The GST01 a lot. I mean, I used to kind of breeze over it. I'm like, wait a minute here. We can get vitamin C. That's easy, but it's actually a little bit more than that, and how oxidative stress impacts recycling. So,
Well, and
yeah,
vitamin C is going to get depleted pretty quickly during a competition too. I don't remember what study it was, but essentially they were testing marathon runners, at the beginning of their marathon and then halfway through, and they were completely depleted of vitamin C. And so,
and they're
we're
breaking down tissue all
they're
the time, right?
they're breaking down tissue, and vitamin C does have an antioxidant property, but now we're running. We've got
Now we're
oxidative
running.
stress. Now we are using up all of our antioxidant resources. And that's not to say that, we need to be high dose supplementing vitamin C, because in America, I have to say, hey, this is good for you, but also don't overdo it. We have like I feel like we need a disclaimer on any podcast that isn't, no, go out and do this immediately. It's, maybe if you're going to supplement because you have, joint and tissue issues, 250 to 500 milligrams tops, and then getting the rest from your fresh fruits and vegetables that contain it, because it is also sensitive to heat. So, yeah, it's vitamin C is crucial for joint repair,
Yeah,
and
it's interesting.
post surgical as well. So post surgery, that can be very helpful as well.
Yeah. It's interesting when I'm looking at labs to see how often, particularly in women, the base amino acids for collagen repair are so depleted. It amazes me, particularly with women at high performance or they're not fueling properly. What it's saying is your body will break down tissue and muscle to repair something. Okay, so the idea that you do need to have sufficient protein is not fly by night. It is amazing we can see that. And we're not talking about someone who's coming out of trauma or surgery or, just recovering, like maybe just giving birth to a child or anything like that. We're talking about people who are fueling, and it just amazes me to see that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I see that, Sarah, so often in midlife women. I don't even run mine. I might see it in my own, but ladies and gentlemen, be aware that your body will scavenge your soft tissue and your protein, and your muscles and your bones to take the protein it needs just to fuel your living. It's amazing, Sarah. Nine
Well,
times out of 10, I see it.
in midlife, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight is the baseline, just for any adult. But getting into the midlife and beyond, it's actually 1.25 to 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram.
Yeah.
The needs go up. And then in my research, in betaine, HCl, and pepsin, our pepsin output actually decreases as we age, and pepsin helps break down protein in the stomach. And
Hello.
so we it's possible, and I don't have the research to back this up, but if we have an increased need for protein, we're suggesting 1.3 grams per kilogram body weight. Is that because we actually need that much protein, or is that because pepsin output has decreased and therefore we're not metabolizing the protein appropriately?
Yes.
And therefore we're not,
I think
essentially we're not
I'm seeing
utilizing it,
both.
or both, or
I'm
both.
seeing both, Sarah, and it's a really good point because I'm definitely seeing the decreased stomach acid. We can just see that, or not see it symptomatically. You kind of already know it's there, but I'm actually seeing it in labs. And therefore, not only am I going to see poor protein breakdown, so I can see that, but at the same time, the markers for collagen breakdown or soft tissue breakdown are skyrocketing, and so it's right there. So I think you're right on it. Now you can't say cause and effect, but in the live setting, that's what we're seeing. NF1, we're talking to you about what we're seeing in clinic. It is absolutely true. Do we need to take that to research? Yeah, 100%. But we're seeing it time after
So
time.
we first need our digestion to be operating properly. And so as we age, B12 levels go down. Zinc is often compromised. If we've got reflux and we're taking omeprazole, and it's a miracle we can metabolize these nutrients at all, but in an optimal way that decreases as we age. So
It
it's
does.
possible, digestive bitters, with your meals can be so helpful. Starting your meal with some digestive bitters.
I can't tell you, that's about 80% of the conversation. Somebody walks out of my door. It's like, what is that? Okay, let me show you what it is. And just know your grandparents probably did it. And, our mountain folk, I always pull from that in Europe. They're sold in every corner pharmacy in every village. It's just part of life. So
What are your favorite digestive bitters you like to recommend, or, digestive support foods?
It was funny. I was talking to a client in the Netherlands this morning about this, and the first thing that client said, "Oh, do you mean like a shot?" I'm like, that does have its place in different cultures, and it has to go with the heaviness of the cuisine as opposed to anything else. But honestly, Swedish bitters, or I will literally go if I'm like in Austria or northern Italy, it's whatever the local pharmacy has put together, because they're collecting the bitters and the flora and the fauna. So I actually collect those, but I do just like, Swedish bitters because you can buy those, it's easy to find. As opposed to anything else. And if that, some people's, their taste bud is just, they're so assertive that will never work. You can do something as simple as like apple cider vinegar, right? The old classics, or lemon juice and water. So yeah, I don't necessarily have a particular brand as opposed to seeding the ideas. And then we can use teas as well, Sarah. You and I use a lot of teas for many different reasons. So you can do even a dandelion tea or something like that. What about
Yeah,
you?
starting a meal with, the, your kimchis and your sauerkrauts and your, kombucha. So adding something that's been
Fermented.
fermented, that's the word I was looking for. Or fermented foods, my goodness. But yeah, bitter foods. So your ginger, arugula, come to mind initially.
Yeah,
But even
yeah.
a ginger tea with your meal or after a meal is a great option.
It's actually I would say hyper recommended, particularly people with motility issues or inflammation. It's just this beautiful thing to do afterwards. It can act as dessert sometimes too. It has that sweetness, right? And it's soothing. Sarah, one more thing before we kind of truck towards the end. I want to come back to something you talked about at the beginning, which is hypoxia. You're talking about HIF1 alpha. Can we go back and talk about that? I want to talk about it in the gut, but you go back and talk about it as it relates to performance, because we do look at it at an athletic level as to whether somebody's going to be more adaptive to endurance, right? I think when that gene facilitates endurance, or when you can actually extend your exercise because you're able to perform at anaerobically, right? Is that correct? That you can squeeze more juice
Yeah,
out of the lemon?
definitely. Yeah. And I had pulled up a paper just kind of looking ahead, and But there was a statement in this paper, an 100-meter race at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, where the elevation is 2250 meters. Male and female athletes who were living in a high altitude were reported to have a time advantage of 0.19 seconds and 0.21 seconds, respectively, compared to athletes who were living at sea level. So the ways in which you can manipulate your body's response in hypoxic environments can be very advantageous to your sports performance. And there's a reason, you want to acclimatize to wherever you're going. But in these hypoxic environments, you're very hypermetabolic. So you're going to burn more calories, and therefore you're also going to break down tissue much faster. So being mindful of that, eating more than you would need to at sea level, but being exposed to that and changing your environment can make you much more resilient to those environments over time. So yeah, just trying to improve your resilience so that you can perform and not end up with an injury, I think is a pretty good take home point there.
And it's interesting with that gene because, it does respond. It's active in a hypoxic environment. That's what it does. And what it does is induces blood vessel growth, right? So then you can carry more oxygen. You're kind of fueling your extremities or wherever that blood flow and oxygen needs to go. So when we look at that gene in the gut, something completely different, what it's supposed to work in an anaerobic or low to no oxygen environment, and it sets off a chain of reactions by which you make the proteins that protects your gut lining, keeps the gut in an anaerobic environment, so you grow the right bacteria. So the way we see that in the gut, when that gene doesn't function, that's where we see the overgrowth. We can see things like what somebody will say SIBO, but the overgrowth of the wrong kind of bacteria. So we're looking at that completely differently clinically. So you probably see in your athletes like poor adaptation or repetitive injuries, but also gut-related issues too. Or digestion as well, or not gut, just dysbiosis, frank dysbiosis. Whether it's related to that or not.
Yeah, and I mostly see, as of right now, beach and volleyball athletes. So beach volleyball is on the beach at sea level. So it's
right, yeah.
I don't see quite as much of it. It's usually, someone who's lives at that, those elevations that is challenged by a different kind of exposure that's exacerbating injury. But the HIF-1 alpha acts as an anti-inflammatory, so it can help manage, the inflammatory response to being at those hypoxic environments. So it's we want those switches to turn on, but we also don't want to end up, chronically inflamed, because at some point, it's just going to give up, right? If we're not managing our recovery very well.
Exactly. So let's just kind of finish on recovery then. We're going to just push us back to genes we do look at for recovery, because I think that's really important. We talked about patterns we see that are associated with repetitive injury. Do some of those same genes fall in the same bucket for recovery? Yeah?
Yeah, they definitely overlap quite a bit. So, when we see high risk for injury, it's going to be in the bone and connective tissue areas, and the recovery stuff is going to be very similar to oxidative stress and inflammation. So if we're managing our redox, our reduction and oxidation reactions, we can do so much better in our sports performance. It's a matter of knowing, like, hey, we've got superoxide dismutase is homozygous for you. And of course, if we also are combining that with connective tissue injury risks, I might use like a glycidin for that athlete to help manage that a little bit better. I might cycle on, SPMs, because for my beach athletes, they often have, 2 and 3 matches a day, sometimes 4. It's really bad. And 2 and 3 days in a row. So they have to be very thoughtful about their fueling and their supplement stack to be able to recover quickly or fuel really fast with all of those carbohydrates, because that's what you need at that time. Yeah, it's a very challenging and grueling sport, and the mental load that we talked about earlier with working multiple jobs, or if I don't finish in the top three, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent this month. There's a lot of pressure there
Yeah, it's
to
huge.
perform.
Yeah, particularly they have families too. I mean, some of these athletes are pro families. They may be in their 30s, family. I mean, it's a huge burden. I'm with you, and you've told those stories. When I'm looking at recovery, again, just switching to, active individuals, whether they're performing or competing or not. I think the two things that come out the most when I'm looking at activity for them that show up is, number one, you need to move your training or some of your gym work to functional movement and soft tissue strengthening, because the frequency we see of these genes that will break down tissue and predispose you to strains, sprains, Achilles injuries is very high. They're high frequency genes. And again, I'm not necessarily working with a high performance crew of people, but they were. They were track athletes. They were collegiate athletes. They're not anymore. And when you ask them, walking in the door, I'm looking and saying, "So, how was cross country in school?" He said, "I had a lot of knee issues or whatever." I'm like, "Yeah, I could see it walking in the door, just in your genes. It doesn't mean to say it's so." So when you work with your physical therapist or your trainer, soft tissue strengthening is the number one thing for you. So we talk about that. And the number two is, you can't hit it hard every day, even though you want to. What part of recovery or repetitive injury is failure to acknowledge, you say, that pain is actually real. The frequency of your sprains and strains is your body telling you that something's not right. And in genomics, you can usually see what it is. So it's very powerful to be able to say, not working out at the gym does not mean to say not being active. It means not hitting it at the level that you are. We see it a lot with midlife women, like, "Oh, things are changing. I'm putting on weight. Therefore, I need to do cardio even harder, and I'll need to lift even heavier weights." And guess what? They're out for another 7 days. Yeah. Been there, done that, Sarah. Injuries come faster when you get older, and they do take longer. It does not matter what anyone says, they do take longer. So be
Yeah.
warned.
Definitely don't want to get to a point where you've got a, osteoporosis or osteopenia diagnosis. So don't wait to get in the gym and have a trainer to do exercises safely and to do them the right way. Because our bodies are very use it or lose it. If we're not using the muscle, if we're not using the bone, if we're not straining it, those resources are going to get reallocated somewhere else. And our body is very smart and has innate intelligence to use things in different ways. And so I love that about our body. And so now that we've said that, and now that we know it, we do need to be proactive. Don't wait for pain to set in before you make that PT consultation. Because
100%.
I mean, I just started in pelvic floor PT, thanks 10-pound, 10-ounce Wesley on, that second pregnancy.
What do you call Wesley? What do you call him?
Wesley the Crusher.
The Crusher.
If you've ever watched Star Trek. But, I have a friend of mine is a pelvic floor PT, and the ways in which she has explained the way that the nervous system is like so intertwined with even pelvic floor health, I'm floored. I'm pelvic floored that, the things that I'm learning from her. But we knew that I had a retroverted uterus, but now, so it's tipped back. It's supposed to tip a little bit forward and towards your bladder. Mine is tipped backwards towards my spine, and it's pushed over far to the right. And now we're also thinking it might be retroflexed. So it's actually like rolled over on itself, kind of like a pancake folded in half. And so that's not great for my digestion. It's can increase, instance of infertility. And we know that's part of my story. But yeah, what are the ways in which we're not being told as women that we're just suffering through pain or incontinence or so many things, like we're having to sew our parts back up into our bodies so that they're not falling out. And, when we could be helped by some of these interventions with physical therapy. So don't overlook, the opportunity for any kind of physical therapy, because the truth is we've got, body trauma, whether that's real or, emotional trauma that interacts with our nervous system, it interacts with our gene expression. So take care of yourself and seek that kind of professional help, because you can learn so much from some of these other therapies and
I
modalities. And I'm
agree.
so grateful for all of the, colleagues that I have are so good at what they do. And I'm so grateful they can help me.
And it's an interesting point. I think you and I have talked about it, and you'll hear me say even privately, I think everyone should have a physical therapy exam every single year. But by law, it's just a posture check. It's a flexibility check. It's like, I mean, I go every week. My physical therapist is now my kind of restorative trainer. I mean, that's how we work together in balance, etc. So I don't just go to if I have injury. It's like she is like a throughput in my life. But also, as you know from our colleague Daryl Frerk, he's brilliant in sort of mobility and kinesiology and connecting the nervous system to your fascia. I mean, it's very kind of,
Yeah.
it's not even, it's just a different way of understanding how the human body is built. And he can spot, just like we can in genomics and biochemistry, he can spot a kink or a posture or a turnout or a turn in that is life-changing. So I really believe in these people. And you know that, well, you've worked with Daryl, and of course I have, but he and I are launching My Mobility Code, which combines physical restoration with genomics, which is amazing. So rehab people who feel like they're structurally they changed or they're heading towards immobility, as you know, he gets people back up who've had strokes, doing split squats with dumbbell twists. Now we do that. We have to think about it. Think about that if you've had a stroke, being able to do that. So anyway, we're huge proponents of listening to your body, sort of what is the guidance that we're going to leave with here. Listen to your body. We're really, really strong on, really understanding your posture, composure, eating, and get the help, eating sufficiently, fueling, right? What else, Sarah, that we want to talk about? Then we'll wrap up our framework.
Yeah, I agree on the fascia piece is huge in the ways that impacts, pain in the nervous system. Cranial fascial therapy can be life-changing for a lot of people, incorporating that with physical therapy. So yeah.
And massage, right, for some people, obviously, these therapies. And what are the guidance in general, like going back to what we're seeing in genomics and how it impacts performance? What else can we talk about? Because we've ended up sort of on the structural side, mobility side. What else?
Yeah, I mean, I think I covered a lot of what I was going to say today as far as, supporting and guiding. But yeah, taking care of your body, listening to your body. But then, if you feel like you are not in touch with your body and how it feels, see a genomic, specialist and interpreter to help guide you in that, because maybe you've lost touch with that. Similarly to how we can lose touch with our satiety cues, to move you towards intuitive eating again, we want to have intuitive movement as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And pain is not a good thing. Pain is, there's soreness, right? But pain, repetitive injury is a signal that something's not right. And don't overlook it being sort of metabolic, how you're fueling is something and how you're built. And it's not always going to be corrected through a change in training, maybe frequency in training and type of training, but more is not necessarily going to be better. And we can see that in genomics. And I think that's the piece that's been so powerful when you're looking at performance. So Sarah, we've talked about what we're seeing, these repetitive injuries. We would use the backdrop of the Olympics, say, what if we'd had genomics? Would there be different outcomes? Would there be a podium position? Would you have made it? We don't have the answers to that necessarily. We can see what we can see. We haven't proven that yet. We talked about why it's happening a lot. Patterns, we talked about some of the genes, the patterns, so a huge mental health piece in there too, and overlooking pain, and just ended just a few moments ago on how we guide. Your body has innate intelligence. It'll tell you if something's wrong or something's off. Our problem is we just override that. There are too many distractions for us to listen.
Yeah, so well said. I think anyone who listened to this podcast is going to come away with some good nuggets of inspiration and information. So let us know what you think of that. And, have you noticed things in your own practice, or yourself as an athlete or someone who likes to be fit and move? Have things like that manifested into your own life and your own body? And it can be a little rough to be sidelined by injuries. And as someone who's struggled with chronic pain off and on, mine's mostly autoimmune nervous system related, but it really stinks when I can't go do what I want to do with the freedom that I want to do it with, because I have to say, nope, Sarah, that's too much today. So being
And
thoughtful
that's
and
okay.
mindful, and that
Yeah.
it is okay. Yeah. It's tough with the identity piece, for some of your midlifers who that's all they've ever known.
That's the
So
hardest piece. Yeah.
So there's a grief in that, and but you can shift and change the way that you do them to keep doing what you love, but doing it differently, and that can help with the longevity of your body and your fitness life for many years and hopefully decades to come. But we don't want to overdo it. That's the truth there. So,
100%. All right.
well, thanks for listening in, and we will see you again next month with another episode. Thanks,
See you
guys.
then. Thanks, guys.